In this video, we're going to talk about what are the first steps you want to take when you're designing and implementing new methods. We're going to talk about specifications, who is a specification for, who writes it, who reads it, what goes into a method specification, what gets left out. So the rest of this course is going to be about creating your own static methods. What are methods? Well, we talked about methods before. We talked about methods as being like verbs. Another way to think about methods is methods are an abstraction, right? You want to do something. You want to have some effect. You maybe want to do that over and over again. Then you put that thing into a method, and then you no longer care about how it works. So let's take a method that we know about, like console.writeLine. We have seen that many, many times already in this course. What does it do? You give it a string, and it writes it out to the console. How does it do it? I don't know. I've been using that thing for 15 years. I don't know how it works. I've never needed to know how it works. It does exactly what it's supposed to do without me caring about how it creates the console window and how it moves the text and how it makes sure the text is aligned right and all of that, right? I don't know how it works. I don't care how it works. It does what I need it to do. It's an abstraction, right? And by being an abstraction, it allows me to free up those mental cycles for solving some other problem. So you want to design your methods really carefully to make sure that they are sensible abstractions that actually solve a real problem clearly, so that people don't have to worry about how does that method actually work behind the scenes. And that person is typically you, right? You may design a method, figure out how it works, implement it, and now you can use it without having to spend any brain cycles on figuring out how it works again. So whenever I am writing a method, in order to clarify my thoughts, I typically write a specification. And sometimes the specification is just a single sentence that just tells me what the method does. And sometimes I write a more complicated specification document. So we're going to over-engineer it a little bit this time, just to kind of illustrate what the full process might be. And I like to choose an existing method as an example, right? Because if you can't implement an existing, straightforward, simple method, then you can't implement complicated methods. So let's pick a method that we haven't seen before. This is a method called max. It's a kind of method that we haven't seen before. This is called an extension method. An extension method looks like an instance method. We have a decimal array called values. We've got a bunch of decimal values that we're going to stick into this array, 4 of them. And then we're going to find out what the maximum value is, right? This is a method that requires us to say using system.link. It's part of the language integrated query package. We're not going to talk about how to create your own extension methods or your own instance methods in this course. We're just going to look at static methods. But it's not at all hard to create a static method that acts like this maximum method. So let's just step into this thing and see what happens. And so we create our values. We can pop this open here. We can see we've got our 4 decimal values. Then we can say, well, what's the maximum value? Well, it's 5.9. And clearly, that turns out to be correct. So let's try creating a specification for our own version of this maximum method. So we'll start with just a blank page, right? And I'll start with, well, what's the purpose of this thing? I want to compute the maximum element of an array of decimals. OK, that's pretty clear. That's pretty straightforward. The name of the method and the purpose of the method should be aligned. And the name should be accurate. It should be a full word. I'm not a big fan of the fact that the existing method is called max. Again, that's kind of for traditional reasons, but I would prefer maximum. And the method should be Pascal cased. I talked about camel casing before, where you want your variable names to start with a small letter and then have a big letter and then some small letters and then a big letter, like a camel. The tradition in the Pascal programming language is to start your methods with a large letter, and that's the tradition for method names in C# as well. So we'll call this thing maximum. It's nice, it's clear, it's Pascal cased, it's a full word. All right. Next thing I usually try to decide is, do I want an instance method, an extension method, a static method? In this course, we're only going to talk about static methods. So does this thing have a receiver? Nope. The receiver is just the type. Right? The next thing I want to think about is, OK, more specifically, what are the inputs and the outputs of this method going to be, right? Something's going to go in and something's going to come out, right? We've seen that in every method that we've done so far, right? There are methods like console.writeLine where strings and information, formatting strings and whatnot go in. Nothing comes out, but the side effect is something writes to the console. We've also seen methods like toUpper, right, an instance method, where nothing is changed, no effect happens, but a value comes back out, a copy of the string in uppercase. So what's going to happen here? Well, our input is going to be an array of decimals. Our output is going to be a decimal value. Are there going to be any effects? Is anything going to be written out to the console? Is any variable owned by the caller going to be mutated the way int.tryparse mutates a variable? No. None of these things are going to happen. Right? Now, pause for a minute. It looks like we have enough information here to start writing code. But I like to take a step back and ask myself, even just given this information here, can I see any problems that are going to arise? How could somebody use this method wrong? Well, it's a maximum method. It's going to take an array of decimals. So I want to find out what's the maximum element in that array. Well, arrays are reference types, and therefore a reference can be null. What if somebody passes a null reference to this thing in? What should it do? It seems like that's wrong. Right? You're trying to ask me, I haven't even got an array here. What's the maximum element? Right? Or you could pass in an array with 0 elements. And that's rare. It's very unusual to have an array with 0 elements in it. But it is legal to have an array with 0 elements. What's the maximum value of an array with no elements? It seems like that's not even well defined. So we should probably say, these are special cases, and we're going to produce errors in those cases. So we're going to say we have an error case. The array must not be null. And we're going to say we have a second error case. The array must not be empty. All right, so this is my specification. What kind of stuff did I not put in this specification? Well, you notice I didn't put in any implementation details. Right? I didn't say the spec requires that the maximum method use a while loop, right, or use a for loop, or any other technology. Right? The method specification should tell you what the method does, what goes in, what comes out, what are the special cases that we have to consider, and what happens with those special cases. We'll dig into that more in a future video. But it should not say what the method does, because of course the method might change what it does. You might implement a method and then realize later, oh, you know what? I could have implemented this cheaper, better, faster, and I'm going to replace the implementation with something that's different. You don't want to have to go back and change your specification. The specification should always stay the same, regardless of how the implementation looks. All right, so who is going to consume this specification? Well, when I write a one-line specification that just says this computes the maximum element of an array of decimals, I write that for myself. Right? I write that to just clarify my thinking about what this thing does. But if you're writing a more formal specification of a method, then you might want it to be consumed by developers who are reviewing your work, right, to make sure that you have thought this thing through carefully. I have many times when I was at Microsoft written up a little specification for a method, sent it around to my coworkers for review, and they've come back with, oh, did you consider this case? Did you consider this case? Did you consider this case? Is it going to be fast enough? What if you pass in null here, and so on, right? Also, testers might want to look at your specification because they will get ideas from it about what are the error cases that you considered and did not consider. You might want your specifications, if the method is going to be published, if other people outside your organization are going to be using it, you might want that to go to documentation so that the documentation writers have something to start with, and so on. So, summing up, before you even begin to write a method, you want to know, what does the method do? What's it going to be called? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? Are there any side effects desired? Are there any special cases? You do that to organize your thought, provide a summary for your coworkers, and so on, and just leave the implementation details out of the spec. And then in the next few episodes, we'll actually start implementing this method.